The ground shook before I even opened my eyes. Dust fell from the broken ceiling above me, and somewhere close, metal screamed against metal. I grabbed my rifle and rolled behind a fallen beam just as a wall of the building collapsed where I had been lying seconds before. My name is Daniel Foss, and I was the only human soldier left standing in a war zone that used to be a peaceful outpost. 3 hours ago, my unit answered a distress call from a mining colony on the edge of human territory. Now my unit was gone, the colony was burning, and I was alone in the wreckage of a supply depot, breathing through a cracked filter mask and listening to something move through the rubble outside. I checked my rifle, half a magazine left, not enough to fight my way out, but enough to buy time if I stayed sharp. I pressed my back against the beam and forced my breathing to slow down. Panic gets people killed faster than any enemy does. I had learned that the hard way, more than once. A sound came from behind a stack of broken crates. Small, quick, not the heavy footsteps of the armored raiders who had attacked the colony. This was lighter, almost careful, like something trying very hard not to be heard. I raised my rifle toward the sound and waited. The crates shifted, and a small shape stepped out. It was not a soldier. It was not even close to a soldier. It was a child, though not a human one. Her skin had a soft gray shade, almost like morning fog, and her eyes were large and gold, glowing faintly in the dark. She wore a torn survival suit 2 sizes too big for her, and she was shaking from head to toe. I lowered my rifle slowly. She froze the second she saw me. Her whole body went stiff, and she let out a short, sharp sound, somewhere between a gasp and a cry. She stumbled backward and fell against the crates, curling into herself, both arms wrapped tightly over her head like she expected me to strike her. I understood then. She had seen humans in armor before, and it had not gone well for her. I set my rifle down on the floor, slow and steady, and raised both hands where she could see them. "I am not going to hurt you," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. "You are safe. Do you understand me?" She did not answer, but her shaking slowed just slightly. Her golden eyes stayed locked on my face instead of my hands, watching for the smallest sign of danger. Outside, the sound of heavy boots crunched through broken glass. My chest tightened. The raiders were still searching the depot, moving room by room, and we were running out of time to stay hidden. I pointed toward a maintenance hatch in the floor, half covered by a fallen shelf. "There is a way out through there," I whispered, "but I need you to trust me for the next few minutes. Can you do that?" Her eyes flicked toward the hatch, then back to me. She did not move. The boots outside grew louder. A shadow passed across the broken window of the depot, and I heard a voice shout something in a harsh, clipped language I did not recognize. My hand tightened around my rifle. I looked at the girl again. "Please," I said. "I know you are scared. I would be too. But if we stay here, we both die." Something in her face changed. Maybe it was the word please. Maybe it was simply that I had not moved toward her, had not grabbed her, had not done anything to confirm the fear written across her small body. Slowly, she uncurled herself and crawled toward me, keeping as much distance as the narrow space allowed. I moved to the hatch and pulled the shelf away as quietly as I could. The metal cover beneath was rusted, but intact. I pried it open, revealing a narrow tunnel that led down into the colony's old drainage system. "Ladies first," I whispered, trying to keep my tone light despite the tightness in my chest. She hesitated at the edge of the hatch, looking down into the darkness, then back at me one more time. Whatever she saw in my face must have been enough, because she lowered herself into the tunnel without another sound. I followed right behind her, sliding the shelf back over the hatch as best I could from below. The moment my boots hit the tunnel floor, I heard the depot door crash open above us. Boots stomped through the room we had just left. My heart pounded, and I pressed a finger to my lips, silently begging the girl to stay quiet. She understood. She pressed herself against the tunnel wall, both hands over her own mouth, eyes wide and fixed on the ceiling above us. The footsteps paused directly over our heads. I held my breath. 1 second passed. Then another. My hand rested on the grip of my rifle, ready to move if the hatch opened, but praying it would not come to that. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds, the footsteps moved on, fading toward the far end of the depot. I let out a slow breath and looked at the girl. She was still frozen against the wall, but her eyes had softened just slightly, like she understood we had survived something together. "Good," I whispered. "That was very good. Now we keep moving." The tunnel stretched ahead of us, lit only by the faint glow of emergency strips along the floor. We moved quickly but carefully, my rifle raised in front, while the girl stayed close behind me, one small hand gripping the back of my jacket like it was the only solid thing left in her world. We had gone maybe 200 meters when the tunnel shook violently. Dust rained down, and a section of the ceiling ahead of us buckled inward with a deep, grinding groan. I grabbed the girl and pulled her against the wall just as chunks of stone crashed down where she had been standing. She screamed, a sharp, painful sound that echoed through the tunnel, and grabbed onto my arm with both hands, burying her face against my sleeve. I held her there for a moment, letting her shake, before gently pulling her forward, away from the blocked path. "We have to find another way," I said, mostly to myself. I pulled up the map on my wrist display, the screen flickering weakly from battery damage. There was another route, longer, curving around toward the old supply lift on the eastern side of the colony. It would take us closer to where the raiders had landed their ships, but it was the only way left open. I looked down at her. "This next part is going to be dangerous. I need you to stay close to me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" She nodded. It was small, barely a movement at all, but it was the first clear response I had gotten from her since we met. We moved through the side tunnel, climbing over broken pipes and ducking beneath low-hanging wires. Twice we had to stop and press ourselves into the shadows as more raiders passed overhead, their voices sharp and full of command. Each time, the girl stayed silent, watching me for signals, following my lead without hesitation. By the time we reached the supply lift, my legs ached and my filter mask was running low on charge. The lift itself was damaged, half its control panel sparking uselessly, but I managed to force the doors open manually. Behind them was a maintenance ladder leading straight up toward the surface, close to where an emergency evacuation shuttle should still be waiting, if it had not already left without us. "Almost there," I told her, though I was not entirely sure it was true. Climbing the ladder was slow and painful. My shoulder burned from an earlier fall, and the girl's small hands struggled to grip the rusted rungs. At one point she slipped, and I caught her instinctively, holding her weight against my chest until she found her footing again. She looked up at me afterward, eyes wide, but this time there was no fear in them, just something closer to relief. We reached the surface, just as the sky began to lighten with the first signs of dawn. Smoke rose from the ruined colony behind us, but ahead, parked on a cracked landing strip, sat the evacuation shuttle, its engines already warming up. A woman named Claire stood near the loading ramp, waving frantically when she spotted us. "Foss, over here, quickly!" We ran the final stretch together, the girl's hand tightly gripped in mine. As we climbed aboard, Claire stared at the small alien child beside me with wide eyes, but she did not ask questions. There was no time for that. The shuttle doors sealed shut, and the engines roared to life beneath us. Through the small window, I watched the colony shrink away below, smoke curling into the morning sky. The girl sat pressed against my side, her small body finally beginning to relax now that the danger had passed. I looked down at her, and for the first time since I found her hiding behind those crates, she looked back at me without fear. Hours later, once the shuttle had left the danger zone and the crew had settled into a quiet rhythm, I felt something small and light shift near my leg. I looked down to find her curled up inside the large pocket of my jacket, fast asleep, her tiny hands loosely folded beneath her chin. I sat very still, careful not to wake her, and let myself finally breathe. She had been terrified of me only hours ago, certain I was just another danger in a night full of them. Now, exhausted and safe, she had chosen the space closest to my heart as the place to rest. I did not know what would happen to her next, where she would go, or who would care for her once we reached safety. But in that moment, watching her sleep peacefully in my pocket, I understood something clearly. Trust is not given easily, and it is never owed. It is earned, one small brave choice at a time, until finally, someone who was once terrified of you finds enough peace to close their eyes and rest.